Not at the hearing here today. Neither was her attorney, and she was not made available.
Tiffany Henyard, once celebrated as a trailblazer and a beacon of hope for Dalton and Thornton Township, now finds herself at the center of a political storm. Her journey from a young, inspiring black leader who broke barriers to a figure mired in controversy has been nothing short of dramatic. Once praised for her bold promises of transformation, equity, and inclusion, Henyard is now grappling with serious allegations of financial mismanagement, procedural misconduct, and ethical violations that threaten to unravel her political career. As mayor of Dalton and supervisor of Thornton Township, Henyard's administration has faced mounting accusations of misusing public funds and engaging in questionable financial practices. These claims have eroded trust in the community she once inspired, with reports suggesting her leadership has weakened the very systems she vowed to reform. Public confidence in her governance has plummeted, fueled by legal troubles, including lawsuits and federal investigations that have placed her actions under intense scrutiny. Henyard, once admired for her dynamic leadership and visionary approach, is now the subject of vocal criticism from former allies, disillusioned residents, and a relentless media narrative portraying her as a leader overwhelmed by scandal. Calls for accountability grow louder, with protests and petitions demanding her resignation becoming a common sight in Dalton and Thornton Township. Contentious board meetings have transformed into arenas of political conflict and personal attacks, further exposing the fractures within her administration. Critics argue that Henyard's inability to deliver on her promises of meaningful change has shattered the trust of the very community she sought to uplift. Allegations of financial impropriety and ethical breaches serve as stark evidence to many that her administration has betrayed the principles of equity and justice she once championed. This mounting evidence has led to widespread demands for audits, transparency, and a thorough investigation into the suspected misuse of public resources. Amid the crisis, a shrinking group of loyal supporters continues to defend Henyard, claiming her leadership has been undermined by systemic resistance to her reform agenda and the structural barriers faced by leaders from marginalized communities. They argue that Henyard is a victim of the same inequities she has long sought to dismantle. However, this narrative of systemic opposition is overshadowed by the steady stream of leaked memos, whistleblower allegations, and internal disputes that paint a damning picture of a leader struggling to maintain control. Once seen as a unifying force, Henyard is now viewed by many as incapable of managing the complexities of overseeing two municipalities. Public disillusionment is unmistakable, and as federal investigations deepen, her legacy as a transformative leader grows increasingly uncertain. Allegations of financial mismanagement and a lack of transparency only amplify demands for clarity and accountability. Her defenders find it harder to counter the mounting evidence that portrays her leadership as deeply flawed. Henyard's dramatic fall from grace stands as a cautionary tale about the immense challenges of public office, especially for leaders confronting systemic issues with limited resources and staunch opposition. What was once a promising political career now teeters at a critical juncture, with her competence, ethics, and ability to lead under constant question. Whether she can rebuild public trust and salvage her career remains unclear, as her vision of transformation is overshadowed by an avalanche of controversy. For many, Henyard's story highlights the fragility of public trust and the unforgiving nature of political leadership. Despite her initial intentions, she now finds herself ensnared in a web of legal, financial, and ethical challenges. As the battle for her political future escalates, the question remains: will she rise from this crisis and reshape her legacy? Or will she serve as a cautionary example of a leader whose potential was undone by scandal? The outcome will define not only how she is remembered, but also whether her story becomes one of redemption or a stark warning about the complexities of leadership in a polarized era.
The doors are locked here, and there's a sign on the building right now that says it's closed for how long? Neither residents nor...
Earlier this week, Tiffany Henyard, the embattled mayor of Dalton and supervisor of Thornton Township, found herself under fire once again after skipping two pivotal meetings, one in Dalton and an emergency session in Thornton Township. Henyard cited credible threats against her and other officials as the reason for her absence, but the claim was met with widespread doubt. Neither the trustees nor the public had been informed of any such threats, fueling speculation that her reasoning was a convenient excuse to sidestep her responsibilities during a critical time. Henyard's absence has only added to the mounting criticism of her leadership. Jason House, a trustee who chaired the Dalton Village Board meeting in her absence, stated that neither he nor the board had seen any evidence to support her claims of threats. This further solidified the perception that her no-show was just another example of avoidance in a leadership already marked by dysfunction. Despite her absence, the Dalton meeting moved forward, albeit under tense and frustrated circumstances. Angry residents packed the chambers to voice their growing discontent with Henyard's leadership. One resident boldly declared, "You talked about being the dream once, but Tiffany, you're a nightmare." Another quipped, "Come to work, sis," underscoring the growing sense of betrayal as many feel she has abandoned her duties at a time when leadership is most needed. Over in Thornton Township, the repercussions of her no-show were even more severe. An emergency meeting had been called to address urgent issues, including the township's lapsed insurance policy, which had already forced the suspension of critical services such as senior transportation and community programs. Vulnerable residents were left without access to these essential resources. Trustee Chrissy Gonzalez, who had organized the meeting, waited an additional 15 minutes for Henyard to appear, but when she failed to show, the session was ultimately canceled. Expressing the frustrations of many, Gonzalez stated, "We're on a toll road of chaos right now, and unfortunately, the residents are the ones paying the tolls." His words captured the growing disarray in the township, as Henyard's perceived inaction only deepens the crisis. The absence of leadership at such a critical moment has left residents outraged, particularly those who depend on the township for basic services. Critics accuse Henyard of prioritizing her self-preservation over her responsibilities as a public servant, feeding the narrative that she is more focused on avoiding accountability than addressing the needs of her constituents. As the fallout from her absence continues to ripple through Dalton and Thornton Township, the vacuum of leadership she has created is eroding public trust and compounding the fragile state of local governance. Instead of providing the stabilizing force she once promised, Henyard's lack of communication and refusal to address key issues have left residents feeling abandoned and betrayed. This latest controversy only adds to a growing list of scandals surrounding Henyard's administration, from accusations of financial mismanagement to federal investigations and an increasingly chaotic political climate. Her critics, including trustees and former allies, argue that her consistent deflection of blame and refusal to confront challenges have only worsened the situation. The ongoing collapse of essential services under her watch has sparked public outrage, with packed meetings and passionate commentary highlighting the community's frustration. Many now view her leadership, once a symbol of hope and progress, as emblematic of dysfunction and instability. For residents and trustees alike, the demand for accountability, transparency, and effective governance has never been more urgent. Whether Henyard can rise above the crisis to repair the damage and rebuild trust remains uncertain. However, with each passing day, the pressure grows and the path to redemption becomes increasingly difficult. What was once a story of promise and potential is now rapidly becoming a cautionary tale of leadership lost to inaction and neglect at a time when her communities needed her most.
To provide a way, provide services. And we're not doing that because they're stalling government, realizing because they...
Speculation continues to swirl around Tiffany Henyard's decision to skip critical meetings in Dalton and Thornton Township, with many suggesting her absence is tied to escalating pressure from an ongoing government investigation. Allegations of misconduct, particularly financial mismanagement, have dogged her administration for months, and insiders hint that formal indictments could be on the horizon. This looming threat has added a sense of urgency and foreboding to Henyard's already precarious tenure. Critics point to a growing list of scandals tarnishing her reputation, including claims of mismanagement, misuse of township funds, and extravagant spending that has pushed the finances of both Dalton and Thornton Township into chaos. Reports of taxpayer-funded vacations and excessive expenditures have further strained local resources, amplifying the financial instability under her leadership. One particularly damning example came to light when former Chicago Mayor Lori Lightfoot analyzed Dalton's general fund, revealing a shocking negative balance of more than $3.05 million. This staggering figure underscores the financial mismanagement critics say has defined Henyard's administration. Adding fuel to the fire, reports of a $440,000 in single-day spending spree on Amazon, none of which has been accounted for, have become a symbol of reckless fiscal behavior. The public outrage surrounding these revelations has only intensified as residents and officials alike demand answers about how such flagrant misuse of funds was allowed to happen. These incidents have painted Henyard as not only incompetent but also dismissive of the transparency and accountability she once championed. Meanwhile, essential services like senior transportation and community programs have been forced to shut down due to the financial crisis, leaving vulnerable residents without the support they rely on. The disconnect between Henyard's leadership and the needs of her constituents has never been more apparent. Despite the mounting allegations, Henyard has offered little in the way of explanation or reassurance, fueling speculation that her recent absences are a calculated effort to dodge accountability. This lack of engagement has further eroded trust in her administration, plunging Dalton and Thornton Township into a governance crisis as both communities struggle to maintain basic operations. Public sentiment has turned overwhelmingly negative as residents bear the brunt of financial mismanagement, enduring a declining quality of life and diminishing essential services. Observers argue that these failures reflect deeper systemic issues within Henyard's administration, where transparency and fiscal responsibility have taken a back seat to personal and political agendas. Calls for immediate audits and investigations have grown louder, with critics determined to uncover the full extent of the financial irregularities that have crippled the townships. Residents are desperate for answers, demanding accountability for how public funds were misused, especially at a time when resources are critically needed to sustain basic services. As scrutiny intensifies, the allegations against Henyard have cast a shadow over her tenure, raising doubts about her ability to continue in her role. Her administration's failure to address these crises and her own avoidance of public engagement have only deepened calls for her resignation. The urgency of this situation has prompted growing demands for structural reforms to ensure financial oversight and restore trust in local governance. For many, Henyard's tenure now serves as a cautionary tale of what happens when promises of transformational leadership are undone by poor management, inadequate oversight, and the prioritization of personal interests over public welfare. The long-term consequences of this crisis remain uncertain, but one thing is clear: without significant change, both Dalton and Thornton Township face an uphill battle. Ultimately, it is the residents, those least able to bear the cost, who will continue to suffer the fallout from this mismanagement.
That will be on the general election ballot despite an attempt to block her candidacy by an ally of current Mayor Tiffany Henyard, who is
the mayoral candidate being challenged, the saga surrounding embattled South suburban politician.
The investigation into Tiffany Henyard's administration has uncovered what many are calling a disturbing disregard for legal and ethical standards, particularly regarding the suspected mismanagement of public funds. Allegations of financial misconduct have sent shockwaves through Dalton and Thornton Township, further eroding trust in Henyard's leadership. Current and former employees have stepped forward with troubling claims, alleging that funds earmarked for community projects have inexplicably vanished without explanation. They describe what they believe to be a systemic effort to conceal financial improprieties, leaving both residents and officials demanding accountability. One anonymous insider revealed that many invoices tied to township expenses were either incomplete or deliberately falsified, making it nearly impossible to trace where the money actually went. Every time we asked for clarity, we hit a wall, the insider shared, echoing the growing frustration within the administration and the community at large. These alarming revelations have amplified calls for thorough audits of both Dalton and Thornton Township, with many demanding transparency and accountability at every level. As more accusations surface, public confidence has plummeted, and lawsuits against Henyard continue to stack up. This growing legal turmoil has raised critical questions about the township's ability to operate effectively amid such disorder. At a recent town hall meeting, one frustrated resident voiced the community's anger. "She's using every resource to fight for herself, not for us," emphasizing the perception that Henyard is prioritizing her own reputation over the needs of her constituents. Employees in Thornton Township have echoed these sentiments, pointing to the ongoing insurance crisis as a glaring example of leadership failure. Critical programs intended to support low-income families and seniors have been brought to a standstill due to unresolved issues with lapsed insurance policies. Services such as senior transportation and community outreach, lifelines for vulnerable residents, remain unavailable, compounding the challenges faced by those who depend on them most. The collapse of these essential services highlights a deeper pattern of neglect and dysfunction that critics argue has characterized Henyard's tenure. Allegations of financial mismanagement and a lack of accountability have overshadowed any attempts at progress, leaving Dalton and Thornton Township in a state of uncertainty and disarray. As community disillusionment deepens, frustration grows over the lack of action on critical issues, while legal troubles continue to dominate the focus of Tiffany Henyard's administration. Time and energy that could have been spent addressing the community's needs are instead consumed by lawsuits, investigations, and damage control. The resulting financial instability has only compounded the challenges facing local government, leaving residents questioning how such a breakdown in leadership could have gone unchecked for so long. Critics argue that Henyard's inability to confront these mounting issues has left the township in a state of paralysis. The ongoing controversies, paired with escalating public distrust, have created an atmosphere of instability that jeopardizes the very functioning of local governance. Calls for systemic reform are growing louder as residents demand accountability for what they see as blatant abuses of power and a disregard for the well-being of the community. The consequences of this mismanagement have been stark, with essential programs disappearing and financial turmoil crippling the township's ability to meet its obligations. Many residents mourn the loss of critical services, while others express anger at what they perceive as an administration more focused on self-preservation than public service. The result has been a widespread erosion of trust, leaving Dalton and Thornton Township grappling with both functional and reputational crises. Public discourse has shifted to questions of transparency, accountability, and competence. Lawsuits and investigations continue to mount, and demands for audits have intensified, underscoring the growing sense that the administration's challenges may be beyond repair. With essential programs still shuttered and public confidence at an all-time low, the need for transformative leadership and genuine reform has become urgent. For many, Henyard's administration has come to symbolize not a solution, but the root of the problem. Critics argue that mismanagement, lack of transparency, and an unwillingness to hold leadership accountable have brought the township to a breaking point. Vulnerable residents are bearing the brunt of the consequences, struggling in the absence of services they depend on. Whether the growing demands for audits, investigations, and reforms will lead to meaningful change remains uncertain. What is clear is that the community is desperate for stability and effective governance. The future of Dalton and Thornton Township now hinges on whether leadership will emerge to restore trust and tackle these challenges, or if Henyard's tenure will continue to be defined by controversy and chaos.
Comment from Mayor Tiffany Henyard. Voters here will first head to the polls in February for the primary election, then
The governance crisis surrounding Tiffany Henyard has unraveled into a full-blown political debacle, marred by internal conflicts, misconduct allegations, and rising public outrage. Once celebrated as a trailblazing leader, the first female and youngest mayor of Dalton, Henyard now faces accusations of prioritizing personal interests over her duties as a public servant. Even her closest allies have started to distance themselves, signaling deep divisions within her administration. Political insiders report a mass exodus of staff, unwilling to endure Henyard's erratic leadership, reflecting a significant morale crisis within her ranks. Trustees in Thornton Township, such as Harmon Carley and Chris Gonzalez, have gone as far as boycotting meetings to block Henyard from appointing an ally to a vacant trustee seat, fearing the move would consolidate her power. Henyard, in turn, has accused these trustees of obstructing the renewal of essential insurance contracts, which has resulted in skyrocketing costs and higher rates for residents, all while reducing coverage. This deadlock has paralyzed local governance, leaving residents to contend with deteriorating services like halted senior transportation, neglected street maintenance, and delayed snow removal. Amid this governance collapse, Henyard has turned much of her focus to legal battles, filing lawsuits over her removal from the Thornton Township Democratic ballot and accusing Dalton trustees of conspiring against her. Critics argue these lawsuits have diverted critical resources away from addressing urgent community needs. Many residents, along with legal experts, question whether taxpayer funds are being misused to finance these personal legal pursuits, further fueling public outrage. Protests outside Henyard's mother's home highlight the growing dissatisfaction with her leadership. Once heralded as a young black woman with the potential to inspire, Henyard's tenure is now overshadowed by allegations of corruption, fiscal mismanagement, and neglect. Reports of personal financial struggles, such as eviction proceedings for unpaid rent totaling over $133,000, and have added to the chaos surrounding her administration, deepening the perception of instability. Accusations of misappropriated community funds, fabricated invoices, and missing project allocations have intensified calls for comprehensive audits in both Dalton and Thornton Township. Trustees opposing Henyard have labeled her leadership a liability, pointing to inflated insurance costs as a glaring example of her administration's financial missteps. Public frustration is palpable, with residents openly accusing Henyard of deflecting blame and avoiding accountability. Henyard's frequent absences from key meetings have drawn sharp criticism, especially as claims of threats against her remain unsubstantiated. Many suspect these absences are less about safety concerns and more about avoiding public scrutiny. Her recent defeat in the Democratic caucus for Thornton Township Supervisor has only deepened the scrutiny surrounding her administration. While Henyard has blamed State Senator Napoleon Harris for orchestrating the caucus to block her supporters, critics argue that her loss was inevitable given the mounting discontent and erosion of trust in her leadership. Rumors of a leaked audio tape allegedly involving a trustee boasting about inappropriate behavior in Las Vegas have further muddied the waters. While the tape's implications remain unclear, its emergence during Henyard's absence has fueled suspicions that internal power struggles and public scandals are deeply intertwined. As public anger intensifies, calls for Henyard's resignation have grown louder. Demonstrators have likened her administration to a sinking ship weighed down by lawsuits, unfulfilled promises, and governance failures. With the February primary election looming, Henyard's prospects of regaining public trust appear increasingly slim. Her detractors continue to gain momentum, and the perception that her leadership has caused more harm than good for Dalton and Thornton Township has solidified. Henyard's once promising legacy now teeters on the brink of being remembered as a cautionary tale of leadership lost to mismanagement, self-interest, and scandal. Whether she faces legal consequences or is ousted politically, the urgent question remains: who will step forward to repair the damage and lead these communities towards stability? For now, residents brace for more uncertainty, unsure if Henyard's administration can be salvaged, or if the damage is simply beyond repair.